Yeah, welcome back to the Things Conference 2024, our little podcast session here about AI and IoT. Is there a match? And today I'll be talking with Jenny Plunkett from Edge Impulse and Matt Hatton from Transforma Insights, which we already had in the last panel.
And the one before that.
And the one before that.
Wow, busy.
Yeah, I have been.
The powerhouse of panels here today at the Things Conference. Very nice. Thank you very much. Okay, even though you have been in the last two panels already, maybe we can do just a quick round of introductions, and then I will ask you some questions. Is that all right?
Yep, happy to.
Start with you, Mr. Hatton.
Yes, Matt Hatton. I'm one of the founding partners at Transforma Insights. I've been a technology industry analyst of various types for about the last 25 years, most of which has been focused on IoT, a little bit around AI and some other disruptive technologies, so hopefully I have something AI related to contribute to the discussion. So.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny Plunkett, and I'm a Senior Developer Relations Engineer at Edge Impulse. I've been at Edge Impulse almost 4 years now, and prior I used to work at ARM at the IoT group. And at Edge Impulse, I work on primarily enabling our users of our software platform to design, train, and deploy machine learning models for edge devices, all the way down from microcontrollers to GPU, all the way up to GPU. And yeah, so I'm so excited to talk about generative IoT and how it can benefit IoT today.
Nice, very nice. So by the way, I'm Kevin Schiffer. I'm a UX designer and front-end developer at the Things Industries. And I also have a big interest in AI, so I hope I can also contribute a little bit today as well. Okay, so let's just get right into it. So before I want to go more into the specifics of IoT and AI, maybe I want to ask a question more generally about AI. How has artificial intelligence already affected your daily lives personally? Is it something that you only work with on a professional level, or something that you already have touch points with in your daily personal lives?
Oh, crikey, that's a big question. If you've already got an answer, then I need to think about it a little bit.
If not, that's also fine. I was just wondering about that.
I can start. So Edge Impulse is, of course, an AI company. We primarily deal with AI models for physical sensor data, so sensor data that we see in the world. I'm sure since you're here at this conference, you deal with LoRaWAN devices, and those microcontrollers all have some sort of sensor on them, whether it be a microcontroller, temperature, humidity sensor, et cetera. So we make intelligence for those physical sensor data patterns. So I've been dealing with that for the last 4 years. But on like a personal career note, I'm also the co-author of an O'Reilly book called AI at the Edge that I wrote with my head of machine learning at Edge Impulse, Dan Satanaika. So you can go check out that book if you want. But yeah, so that's how I've been involved in AI, and of course, Edge Impulse is entirely AI. But it's only been in the last year and a half, 2 years or so, that I've really been looking more into the scoping of generative AI and how that can interact with this world of tiny devices for IoT and edge devices. Because OpenAI, ChatGPT, those models are huge, and you don't really think about how they could possibly fit on a tiny device like a microcontroller. But in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been looking at like how can these generative AI tools benefit the world of IoT data, such as synthetic data generation, or data set augmentation, or data set validation, things of that nature. So that's what I've been looking at in the past year and a half, and yeah.
Very good. So I was slightly fixated on your idea of how I introduced AI into my own personal life, and maybe I'd rather I didn't. So that's possibly something I'll try avoiding. But professionally, certainly, it's hard to avoid. If you've been immersed in IoT, then you've got to start thinking about, okay, well, how does IoT impinge on these other disruptive technology areas? And if you think about IoT as how you sense the world and how you act in the world, so remote monitoring and then remote control, well, the next step on from that is naturally some form of remote automation. And so naturally, the research that we've been doing at Transforma Insights has expanded to kind of encompass that concept of AI and how you're making use of AI within IoT deployments. And it's extensive, right? We did some I know there's going to be some rolling of eyes in the audience about me talking about analyst numbers and forecasts and so on. But anyway,
all right.
we did some calculations on the proportion of AI which is deployed in IoT devices in terms of instances, and we estimate it's more than 90%. Which, now don't get me wrong, this isn't more than 90% of AI value is deployed within IoT devices, because effectively an AI on somebody's TV is addressing one person rather than an AI which is controlling a chatbot on an insurance company's website is interacting with hundreds of thousands, millions of people. So the values are rather different, but tons and tons of AI sits on IoT devices. And also you can think about environments where you're replacing IoT sensors with some form of AI. Video analytics is the obvious example, where rather than having multiple sensors around a factory, you can make use of, well, I don't know, in the most extreme example, a Boston Dynamics spot dog to go run around the factory and find out what's going on. But that's maybe those things are pretty pricey, so that's maybe an extreme example. But using video cameras for time and motion studies and so on, it's a kind of a natural extension and almost a competitor to a lot of the more traditional IoT stuff that we've always historically looked at.
Right. Well, that reminds me very much of your use cases in Edge Impulse, right? Doing calculations right on the locally on site, basically. Can you tell us a little bit about the concrete use cases that you have for example, video interpretation by AI, and that using that in IoT use cases?
So it's funny that you bring up the spot dog. One of the things that we're actually looking into at Edge Impulse is utilizing sort of a generative AI platform from Nvidia called IsaacSim, which is a robotics platform, which even Boston Dynamics, I'm sure, has used to help train their dogs. But I'm sure they have plenty of in-house algorithms and things for sure. But something that we're looking at Edge Impulse is how can we make a tiny version of this dog for use in the home or for use in other factory settings that you don't need a giant robot dog for. Maybe something small that just sniffs around on the floor. So something that we're looking at Edge Impulse is putting a few cameras and sensors on a tiny robot dog and having something like an Nvidia Jetson GPU on board or Raspberry Pi that has multiple models on the device to analyze different things in the factory all at one time. So we could have computer vision to analyze anomalies in the factory. We could have computer vision to detect pallets on the floor for counting these missing pallets that were missing in the Amazon warehouse. And we could also have connectivity on the tiny robot dog to send the results of these anomaly detection models for computer vision to something like a ChatGPT or a small language model to analyze what we're actually seeing in the anomalous data. So we could take a picture of the floor. We have a model that's trained on just images of the floor. We could see that there's something in the image from the robot dog. And of course, when we're trying to save bandwidth and latency and all these costs on the dog, so we only want to send these anomalous images from the dog to the cloud. And for models as large as ChatGPT, for example, you're only going to want to be able to do it in the cloud. So once you send this anomalous image into ChatGPT, it will then tell you what it sees in the anomalous image, and then you can do further insights on the device locally from the data that comes from ChatGPT in text form, or you could alert a factory worker to come and perform some maintenance, et cetera, much quicker than if you just had an anomaly detection model on there, just saying anomaly detected, alert, alert, alert. Now you have ChatGPT actually giving you the physical world insight of there's lots of dust under here, and that's why the fan is clogged, or something of that nature.
Okay.
That's really interesting because, sorry, I just want to come back on that. Because one of the things that we see as a problem with IoT is it tends to be very esoteric, have very specific deployment parameters and areas that it's focused on, whether that be particular verticals or whatever. But maybe often the anomalies are things that are actually much more broad-based, and then going back to the more broad-based generative AI models actually does make sense. Whereas perhaps that's the wrong size of widget that you're about to use in that thing is not something that ChatGPT is going to know about, but the fact that there's a big pile of dust is, which I find that fascinating.
Like precisely, right? It takes to think about a use case where you're looking at a floor, there's like a million possibilities of what could be on the floor, right? So it makes more sense to have a general model to analyze what's there rather than having a tiny model directly on the device that's trained on like thousands of different objects. Even if you have a model that's trained on thousands of different objects to be a computer vision classifier, you're still not going to have, what if that 1001 object you're not going to catch, right? So you have to have something with anomaly detection in it. Or, I just feel like anomaly detection plus ChatGPT or a small language model is the future for things in IoT. Just because collecting data in these industries is so hard, and it's so vast and broad. Unless you have a fixed camera looking at one specific location, and it's never going to change ever, 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 and you're never going to move the device.
Doing quality control.
Yes.
Is it this thing, or is it something else? If it's that thing, fine. If it's not, then throw it away or whatever. Yeah.
Once you have a moving object like Spot or the robot dog, the options become limitless.
It could be seeing anything. Yeah, quite.
So that means also you're saying that combining edge computing with cloud computing and conditionally adding cloud computing to the mix is also like a valid approach in these kind of use cases, right?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, it really depends on the use case. I think in terms of certain use cases where you want to make sure. In the past, our AI on the edge device, we really valued because it really maintains the privacy of all the data because it doesn't go to the cloud. So now we're like, okay, now we want it to go to the cloud. So it still really depends on the use case, which I think is where small language models and tiny trained models that have very few parameters compared to the trillions that ChatGPT has are going to become really important as well. Why don't we have a local small language model on the device that's trained for a specific subset of topics for your environment? So you can get those textual human language results on the device instead of sending it to the cloud. I think right now we're at a really distinct intersection of the limitations of edge device computing and also the unlimited possibilities of data set computing or data center computing. So I think over the next year we'll just see so much more capabilities added for small language models on edge devices that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there's a really interesting area which maybe hasn't quite been explored yet, which is about this orchestration of the subsidiarity, if I can refer to it that way. Where is the most sensible place for the processing to take place? And maybe whether that's small language models or large language models. I never thought about it in those dimensions, but it's a very interesting element of it. But do you want your processing to happen on the edge device? Do you want it to happen in the cloud? Do you want it to happen on the somewhere in between? And where's the sensible place for that to happen? And how do you orchestrate all of that? And I think that maybe we, not doing me, but the industry as a whole has not yet quite got to grips with how that works. But as at least I think recognise that's an issue, right?
Yeah.
Right. So talking about ChatGPT and OpenAI brings me to the question that there's always this question of building versus buying, right? So if you use external services like that, would you also make a case for building your own large language models, maybe in-house, to keep that more siloed or something? What is your take on that?
I can jump in on this one quickly. It's something that we talk to some pretty big technology vendors about that have very specific vertical solutions around retail and industrial and a whole bunch of other areas, and they have started to try to build their own large language models and just concluded that actually off-the-shelf stuff from somebody else makes way more sense, and actually generally it's a partnering approach rather than anything else. I think that's pretty universally the case, but you might disagree.
I don't know if I disagree. The making your own. Well, considering I focus primarily on edge AI, I don't want to compete with OpenAI,
right,
you know.
that's all right.
But in terms of like training your own, I just don't really personally see the value. I mean, we do have machine learning engineers at my company who make their own versions of YOLO, for example, the computer vision models, and so that's something that we do because we want to have more optimized models all the time. So maybe that's something that we would look into. But in the case right now of like competing with OpenAI, I wouldn't do that. But for edge devices, for small language models, I think that's definitely something of the future to train your own on a very specific subset of a topic.
Okay.
Sort of a question about how easy it gets to train. You mentioned about synthetic data. Does that help with training smaller language models? Sorry, I'm asking questions.
That's all right.
Again, but I'm finding
All
this.
right.
I find this
Please go ahead.
fascinating. Is that a very useful way for focusing in and training more specific vertical application, industry-specific use cases, which has always kind of been the problem with applying AI to IoT because it's
Yeah. I mean, one of the most classic use cases I talk about all the time with synthetic data is, say you want to train a model to identify glass breaking in your shop. You don't want to have to go around and like record with a microphone glass breaking a bunch of times, right? So that's a perfect use case for synthetic data set generation. And something that OpenAI already has existing is the OpenAI Whisper model. You can just type in a prompt into Whisper. You can just type in glass breaking, and it will generate thousands of different synthetically generated audio samples of glass breaking with wind, whatever you want. And that's a perfect use case of taking, for example, a keyword spotting model and augmenting it with this glass breaking to make it even more robust for your use case. So I think that's a great example for synthetic data in the future.
autonomous driving was the other one that's always quoted at me, right? You don't want to actually have to test running people over in the field. You want to do that in a modeled environment, I would have said.
Are you also using other synthetic data generation, like imagery or video in your applications, or was it now just this audio example?
No, so at Edge Impulse, recently in the past year, I actually did talk about this at Nvidia DTC. We have made an integration with Nvidia Omniverse, and that's a tool that allows you to procedurally generate images for your computer vision projects with any setting. So as long as you can make a digital twin of it in a 3D environment, you can create new data in this virtual world that is mirrored exactly to where you're going to deploy your edge device in your edge AI model. So something that I did this last year was a conveyor belt application with Pepsi cans on it. And in this virtual world that NVIDIA has created, I can have 7 different cameras located that procedurally change the focal length and the distance and the lighting and the shadows and the frame rate of the camera. And I can create a huge, massive data set that would have taken me hours to do in real life, just with the click of a Python script button. So that's something that we're working on as well. And it's a very similar idea that we have in NVIDIA Isaac Sim for robotics as well, for physical world sensor data with IMU, radar, et cetera. The same type of procedurally generated Python scripts can be applied to generate these synthetic data sets, all within these NVIDIA tools, Omniverse and Isaac Sim. So it's really, really exciting, and we're still working on that, so stay tuned.
Awesome. Very nice, very exciting. Oh, sorry, you wanted to say?
No,
oh,
I
okay.
was just...
All right. Another question is when you're using, when you're doing these IoT use cases which use synthetic data and then also, and use that also to feed into AI or like a large language model, together with real data from sensors, like how do you make the right balance between all these, like between the synthetic data, the real data? How do you make sure that it stays meaningful?
That's a you question, not a me question, I think.
No, so this is the question I get all the time, and I put it in your prompt there because I thought maybe we could have a little hypothetical discussion about it. But people always asking me, you know, I go on I make these talks about synthetic data set generation and generative AI, and you can make these huge, robust data sets with just synthetically generated data. And then the first question people ask is, how can I trust this data set? Like, how can I deploy this out into the field and trust that it's actually going to be accurate for my use case? Like, I can't use this for worker safety to analyze hard hats if it's not using the precisely exact hard hat, you know? Like, so there's a lot of there's a lot of trust that has to be involved. So the number one answer I say to that is I would rely on synthetically generated data as a first pass, as creating your model for the first time. And then over time, I would use real life collected data to add to that data set and make it more and further robust. But I do think for right now, in terms of the trust, because I think us as a community, as in a world and in industry, we need to have more trust in these synthetic generated data sets. I just don't think that's going to happen for a while, but I do think we can trust them on a first pass level, as a prototyping level. So that's what I would say there. And in terms of where's the balance, it really depends on the use case and what you're using it for. I would not put a fully synthetically generated data set into a hospital. Like, I wouldn't put it somewhere where it's going to be saving lives on the warehouse or hospital level. But I would put it at on an apple picking robot or something, you know? Because the worst thing that's going to happen there is they pick the wrong apple at the wrong time, you know? Like,
it's acceptable.
That's what I would say.
I mean, it's got to be said, there's quite a lot of skepticism about models that are based on actual data, and you've got potential for creep and all sorts of and questions of oversight and so on. So yes, relying on synthetic data probably needs even a step more comfort and confidence. But as you say, where it doesn't really matter that you might miss the odd apple or pick something that's not an apple. Wow. Yeah.
Right. So that brings me also to my next question about we are seeing more regulation around AI. So the EU AI Act was already enacted, and it has been subject to lots of discussion, and it's likely that other countries will follow suit. Has that affected your work already, or what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, it hasn't affected my work particularly because we don't work directly with AI models. But one of the things we do is we look to track regulations in IoT and AI and all of these various disruptive areas, mostly IoT and AI, frankly, in terms of things that might have implications for enterprises that are deploying or vendors that are selling into the space. And the AI Act is one of the things that looks particularly significant, shall we say? Anything that involves critical national infrastructure, anything that involves personal data, requirements for documentation, and quite strict oversight. And there's quite a strict set of rules around the use of AI, and that was kind of inevitable. And maybe it's even happened a little sooner than we might have expected. And in a way, I think that's probably a good thing, defining the parameters in which everybody has to work. But it is certainly something that people need to be aware of if they're making use of AI. Over to you, I think, probably.
I don't have much to say about it, but I would like to shout out, there's this great conference, if you're interested in the idea of regulation and ethics of AI, there's this great conference that they put on in Switzerland every year called AI for Good. And they bring a lot of leaders that are specifically in governing bodies about the policies related to AI in, and have panel discussions. And it's really inspiring to see that there are people doing this oversight and making these laws. And I think it's completely necessary, especially for these large language models and stuff, and using them for non-nefarious reasons.
Yeah, completely.
Right. Maybe just a follow-up question to that. So, what would be your approach to deal with these regulations? Like, what would you recommend for people that want to build AI use cases together with IoT, and they're unsure about how to meet the regulations? Do you have
hire a good lawyer? I think that's realistically, I think that's the only
read the terms and conditions.
Yeah, that's the only recommendation you can give, really. I mean, one of the things that we put together these databases of here's all the regulations and so on, but in quite prominent characters we say, we are not lawyers. This should not be taken as legal advice. If you want to know about your own particular deployment, consult a lawyer, and that really is the nub of it, I think.
I see. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, I think we're almost ready.
I had one thing,
Sure.
just a comment. There's been a lot of discussion around video, and actually there was one interesting use case that I was thinking about in the run up to the session, and we kind of talking about IoT as digitalizing the physical environment, which is essentially what it was there to, putting what is physical into the digital world. And there's a deployment from, or there's a product from Telefonica, the Spanish telecoms operator, called Smart Steps, where they effectively do with retail environments what has been done in online environments for years. Tracking where people go, what they look at, what they pick up, what they put down, what they end up buying, what they don't end up buying, and it's using cameras, and it's monitoring dwell time and what's attracting people's attentions and where they go in the store and so on. So effectively, it's taking potentially the learnings from the digital world and kind of feeding it back into the analysis of what's happening in the physical world, which I thought was quite an interesting one, and it was one that was just in my mind as we were talking about those video use cases. So I thought I'd throw that one in the mix.
That's great. Can we find more info about this on your website? Or
drop me a line, and I'm sure I can find something about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, as I said, I think we're just ready to wrap up this session. Yeah, I want to thank you both very much. That was Matt Hatton from Transforma Insights and Jenny Plunkett from Edge Impulse. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.